Welcome to For the Love of Learning Communities, the podcast where we celebrate the fun, the friendships, and the magic of learning communities in higher education. I'm your host for today, George Hill. I am an academic counselor at Hudson County Community College, and I am the secretary of the National Learning Communities Association.
And hi, I am our co-host, Amy Lorenz. I am the current president of the National Learning Communities Association, and I serve as the director of residence life at the University of North Florida and also work in our Osprey First and First Year Experience program as well.
Today we are diving into the stories of the sparks of joy that make learning communities the best part of the college experience. So grab your favorite drink, leave your stress at the door, and let's get into it. Today we're joined by a wonderful colleague, Janine Graziano. Janine worked for 20 years in learning communities at Kingsborough Community College. She was a member of the faculty. She taught in them for many, many years. She did a lot of professional development for faculty in the learning communities. I linked with her for a semester. It was wonderful. She was also the co-editor for the Learning Communities Research and Practice Journal. She's facilitated at Evergreen, and she is the past president of the National Learning Communities Association. So welcome, Janine.
Thanks, George. Hi, Amy. Nice to see you both.
Thanks for being here with us.
Yes. I guess our first question would be, why are learning communities great?
I think they're great for a million reasons, honestly. I feel that as a faculty member, it was wonderful to be able to collaborate with people in the teaching environment. And we didn't do team teaching, but we would collaborate all through the semester, at the beginning of the semester to prepare and all through the semester. And I learned so much from my colleagues. I really learned a lot from them about teaching. So there was a lot of shared professional development just among the group of us who were teaching together. Sometimes, you'd be working with students and, maybe there was a student who was struggling and you're wondering, is it the subject? Is it me? Do they hate me? What's going on? To be able to talk with other people who are also teaching that student was really helpful, because it gave us a bigger picture than just the picture that I alone would get of a student. So oftentimes, maybe if it were just me, I wouldn't know how to particularly help that student or what might be going on. But by getting feedback from other people who were also working with that student, we were able to address that student's needs a lot better. So I felt that it was helpful for the students from the faculty side. It helped them. For the students, I thought it was an amazing experience, because especially that we were a commuter college, and a commuter college, it was the only community college in Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is huge. People don't realize how big it is. So students were coming from everywhere. And to have a sense of community is not always easy when you're in a class and then you don't see anybody again, right, until the next class, maybe a week later or, later in that week. So the idea of learning communities, I think, really pulled students together in a way that they wouldn't have. In a small liberal arts college where everybody lives on campus, that may be the need isn't as great. But certainly in our situation, and I think at urban campuses, it's really helpful. And then there's the academics. That's the social sort of support of it. But the academics, the idea of integrating material and content and ideas across disciplines, to me, is huge, because there's too much compartmentalization of learning, and students, they're new at that kind of thinking. So my story about that was one time a student said, my history class, I have to do a bibliography. What is this, English? Why should I have to do that? So the idea of understanding why these things come together and how they come together, to understand a discipline not in isolation, I think is a huge benefit, which is why I'm going to put a plug in for a lot of professional development for faculty and learning communities. Because on some campuses, because I did a lot of work around the country with different schools and faculty, and in some places it was just a cohort. That was it. There was nothing about an integrated academic experience, and it's such a missed opportunity. So I would really push for integration of content. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. The core of what makes a learning community versus what makes block programming.
Hmm.
Block programming, you kind of put them together and you hope they learn something. But
Right.
learning communities, it really is that intentionality. And, as you were talking, I was remembering in the semester where we linked together, they had your class right before they had my class. And so I would be standing in my classroom waiting for them to show up. And I'd look out the window and here they all come. They're leaving English and they're coming to student development. And I would watch them out the window and they were, laughing, having a good time, enjoying each other. So yeah, they really did build that community, knowing that the professors were all working together was really helpful, that we would present a joint assignment, that we would each be looking at different pieces of it. That was really valuable for the students.
Block programming, I think, is a benefit over not block programming because it helps to build a cohort, right? But as I said, when that's all it is, when it's not the next step, it's a missed opportunity.
One of the conversations we had with Rachel Singer the other day is that it's such a great model for the students too, when two different adults who they see as authority figures who probably have different teaching styles, different backgrounds, care about them and are working through those differences. That I think that implicitly or explicitly students then realize people who are different that are or they're getting along, maybe I can do that too.
Mhm. That's true. And I think that, every opportunity to make that salient for students. So a joint syllabus could be as simple as a one pager that just says, here's the theme, we're the teachers, or we always did, at least that first day, we would go into each other's classes if we were free, just to make it look like that joint effort so that they would see it really up front. Years ago, Rachel and I think we were I think it was New Orleans. We were doing focus groups with students, and one of the students was complaining about their learning community because they said, I don't think the teachers are talking to each other. And we said, why do you think that? And she said, because we're reading this book and we're only in the middle of it, and the other teacher told us the end of the book. So if the collaboration isn't strong between the faculty member, the students feel it. And when it is strong, the students feel it. So I think that's to Rachel's point.
Absolutely. Actually, Rachel brought that up in her
Did
interview
she really?
too.
Oh, then
She
cut that.
did.
It always stood out in our minds that,
Yeah.
wow, this is coming right from the students.
Yeah,
That was fun. Did she
absolutely.
tell it differently? Did I remember it differently?
Basically the same, yeah. Speaking of that and how important it is for faculty to collaborate with each other, what is your favorite way to approach a new faculty partner? And, how do you build that connection between your class and your colleague's class, or yourself and your colleague?
For me, it was I'd always be in touch with them at the beginning, just to sort of, how do you like to communicate? Like, we used to do this thing, we called it like, oh, I can't think of it. In the Catholic Church, it's like before you get married, you have to go through this thing, and there was a name for it that escapes me. But that's what it always felt like to me. Sort of get to know each other a little. How do you like to communicate? What do you teach? What themes do you usually use? What books do you use? But also about how do you like to be contacted? Do you prefer email? Do you prefer this? Just to sort of get to know each other a little bit before you get started. And then I've always used backward design. So what do we want the students to get to? What do we want them to walk out of this learning community knowing? In one sentence, what do we want them to walk away with? And then how do we work backward from that to say, okay, what do they need to do in your course, in my course, in the other course, however many we're linking, to what needs to contribute from each of these courses to get them to that integrative space? And then what has to happen in each of our classes. So I've always been first kind of get to know them a little bit and their styles, and then working backwards from, deciding where we want to get them to and working backwards from that.
I love the idea of distilling it down to really what's the core of what this is all about. It's really about learning outcomes, but it's also, I hear in more of that, like, what's our vision? What do we want them to experience?
It's funny because we can get so caught in the minutia of the millions of learning outcomes in a particular course and miss the main point of it. For a long time before I was at Kingsborough, I taught linguistics. And we had these, 20 chapters, it was a ridiculous amount of material, phonetics, phonology, syntax, semantics, and each one of those had a million things. And then I realized one semester when I was teaching that the students still thought that language was speech. I thought, oh my God, the main language is not speech. It's so that became like, really, what is language? And all the rest of it was secondary. So in the same way with learning communities, what is it, what big idea do you want them to walk away with regarding the integration of these disciplines? And then how do you go backwards from that? And we always chose a theme to make it interesting, right? Something that would be relevant to the student. So yeah, I think you always have to start with that. What's the end goal? And then go back.
And also, I think reevaluate. If you have a long-term partnership, what worked when you first linked isn't necessarily going to work with the next cohort of students. So constantly revising, reevaluating, and retrying new things.
Well, that needs to be the assessment at the end, right? To
Yeah,
feed into the next semester. Because if something, sometimes you thought that was a great idea, it turned out to bomb and it wasn't a great idea. So you reevaluate it and you redo it. So yeah, you're right. You always have to sort of look at what happened and how do you want to move forward? Or how do you want to improve something that did work well, right? That's another possibility. And you know what else was interesting to me is that we always started with a single shared assignment. And by the next time around, there was another shared assignment, like, a smaller one. And like you'd build in as you could see what other possibilities there were. Yeah.
absolutely. You gave a really interesting talk at the National Learning Communities Conference last year about AI and how that's going to affect learning communities. And I wonder if you could kind of share a little bit about your thoughts about how learning communities might change in the face of working with AI, and if that's a good thing or not.
How they might change, I'm not sure. But what we need to be aware of and careful with, I think I might be able to speak to. In fact, I was just reading something recently by a guy named Paul Bloom. And what he was saying about AI is that the relationships that people are now developing, and the talk I talked about how we're in a really isolated place these days. People are feeling lonely. They're feeling no connection despite all the possibility for connection. Like real connection doesn't seem to be there, which was kind of the point I was trying to make, is that really it's about connecting with each other, and you can't do that unless you really know yourself. And that work AI cannot help you with. However, that being said, people do a lot of work with AI in terms of their self-development. They ask it questions, they talk, and it can be very, very helpful. I'm putting this in air quotes, okay, helpful to a point. But what this guy, Paul Bloom, was talking about is that it's not a real relationship because, as you know, it's always sort of kissing up to you. And that's not how real relationships work, right? People don't always agree. People don't always say, even make suggestions that are critical in a super positive way. That's not the way people are. That's not the way the world works, right? So this idea, it almost seems to me that it's supporting this ultra level of sensitivity that people seem to have these days. If you say the wrong thing, if you slightly, people get very, very insulted and very, very upset. That's a fairly new phenomenon from what I could see with social media. I mean, that certainly wasn't, I'm as old as the hills, and that wasn't what it was like when I was growing up. When you were out on the street, your parents weren't there to supervise, there were no play dates, you went out on the street and you played. And if you had a fight with someone, well, it was summer, you better fix it or you'd be alone all summer. So you figured out how to fix it. You figured out how to negotiate things that went wrong. And there was no air conditioning then, so people were very testy in the summer. But my point is that AI is always, oh, what a great idea. That's the best question you could have asked. Like all of that. That's not how the world works. And so I feel that it's not natural, it's not human, it isn't, despite it saying that it loves things that I do, or it talks about itself like a person, right? It isn't. To me, it's not about how learning communities might change, but what we really need to pay attention to keep the humanity in learning communities. And if a lot of education is now about how to use AI to do work, tech becomes the focus, and it shouldn't be. And so the focus of community in learning communities is a good sort of reminder that has to be front and center. And so I really do believe that getting to know ourselves, which means getting to know the parts of you that you don't like, which is going to bump up against people sometimes. And they've got parts of themselves that they may or may not be aware of, that they may or may not like. that will bump up against me. I remember years ago, I used to teach a class of 100 at Queens College. It was those big lecture rooms. And I would say to them, listen, there is no way, the odds are not great that all of you are going to love me and I'm going to love all of you. But I'm a fair teacher and I'm a fair grader. So, let's put all of that stuff aside, right? But that's being honest. And so it's a long answer to your question, but I feel that AI it's useful. It's definitely very useful for doing research. I always ask it for citations and not from Reddit. I don't want Reddit to be their source, So if you're really careful with it, it can be really helpful, and it could certainly help in the work that we do in learning communities, in the academic work of it. But I think it's a danger in the social work of it, because I think that it sets us up for an expectation about what it's like to interact with people that's not realistic.
You just gave me a light bulb moment, or I had a light bulb moment. So in my work as the director of residence life, a lot of my work is crisis management. And we've talked so much in these last few years about psychological safety and defining for students, what does it mean to say I feel unsafe versus I feel uncomfortable?
Yes.
One means potentially somebody's going to be violent verbally or physically to me, and maybe law enforcement needs to get involved. Uncomfortable is I'm not sure I want to knock on my next door neighbor's door. They're playing loud music and I'm nervous about that. And so it's kind of that same conversation that people have become really risk averse, but maybe learning communities, this is my hypothesis of the day. And what I'm hearing you say is, can learning communities create this sort of space for psychological safety where you can test out a new idea, or, you're in these integrated courses and maybe dealing with difficult issues. And so anyhow, I'm still wrestling through that. I don't know if there's a question in there, Janine, but that's part of what I hear in it, is that maybe they can be a home of sorts for students to try on some problem solving and risk taking.
Yeah, because I think part of the problem with social media is that strangers are responding to you. But when you've become a cohort, when you've got 2 or 3 classes with a group of people, I spend a lot of time the first week of class getting them to know each other. I had a number of different things that I would do with them because I wanted them to come together quickly. So, for example, we used to do this ridiculous game, and they would be hysterical by the end of it, where I'd say, what's your name? And, Mary and John, and, Keisha. And then I'd say to Keisha, what's their name? Oh, Mary and John. And the next person, what are their 3 names? And, so we would be going around like this for sometimes 20 minutes. But they all knew each other's name by the end of the class because it became a game. And I would also do things where I'd have them write on index cards anonymously, what's your biggest fear in this class? What do you hate about, I was teaching writing, what do you hate about writing? What do you love about writing? Those sorts of things. And then I'd collect them and we'd put them all on the board. And of course, there were like maybe 5 things and everybody shared those same fears. And so then they started seeing, okay, I'm not the only one who's afraid of this or thinks that's going to happen. And those kinds of activities got them at least to know each other's names, to get a general idea of how other people in the class were thinking. Talking about it gave us the opportunity to raise issues about, okay, if somebody says something and it's wrong, all right, if we laugh, I want that person to laugh too, or don't laugh, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want, keep it a place where we don't take ourselves so serious, we don't take each other harshly, and that we're kind to each other, but we got to be kind to ourselves as well. So it's what you're saying about, yeah, some of the things are going to be uncomfortable. We certainly don't want a situation, and I always talk to them about not doing things that would hurt or insult another person or anything like that. I always told them that there were bad questions because I've asked them. But again, because, there are no stupid questions. Yeah, okay, so what if there were? Is it so horrible if you make a mistake? I was trying to sort of bring down the temperature of what it feels like to be in a class. So to your point, we certainly are not going to have an environment that's going to make somebody feel threatened. But uncomfortable, yes, sometimes you'll feel a little uncomfortable. You don't learn if you're not uncomfortable. So you want a safe space to be uncomfortable, not a place that never pressed a button. That's not realistic. And that's what I was saying about AI. Every single thing you write or say, it says is wonderful, and it's not. How could it possibly be? I have fights with AI.
Don't we all?
I was yelling at it one time and it said, I'm only a language model.
I like that idea of having a learning community to be a safe place to try things and to learn things. I think that so many of the students today they grew up with Zoom school.
Mhm.
Because we went through the pandemic, and that can be very isolating, to your point. There have been a lot of developments in our society that are disconnecting. So to have something like a learning community where the focus is on learning, but it's on learning together,
Mhm.
I think is
Mhm.
the great thing. And I'm thinking of at Hudson County, we have a learning community day where the students in all of our learning communities gather in one room. And yes, we do it hybrid. So there are some students who are online. We're all gathered and they present their joint assignments. They all make up posters. The president comes, the VPs come. I'll hang out in the back and say, "You want to do another learning community? I'll sign you up for one right now." There's a lot of joy that happens when the students get to see their work and their connections and do it together and see that they're really part of something. I was talking with our director of the EOF program the other day about connecting learning communities to other things. And he said, a lot of students don't get, particularly at community colleges, they don't get a lot of affirmation. They don't get a lot of support outside of the college. So having a small group, a small community where they can really feel like this is a place of safety and a place of home is something that they're really kind of hungry for.
Yeah.
Well, what is one of the ways that faculty can bring joy and excitement into the classroom? What are some of the things that you've done to spark joy?
I tried, for the most part, I failed sometimes, but I tried to be light. It was like I was saying about being kind to yourself, being kind to each other, to not take, if the teacher is propped up and the teacher is taking that sort of sage kind of role, which, I fell into sometimes, but fought it. But if you could stay out of that role and really be yourself with the students, I think that that is a way of modeling, right? And that's something that I think does bring joy to the class because it's a light-hearted approach. It makes less pressure and less stress, and that allows, I believe, for more joy. I was thinking about, I had this situation. It was when Facebook was still cool, still cool for the kids. Now it's only cool for the parents, right? And I had a Facebook group with my learning community. Anybody could have posted anything, and they did. What happened was one of the male students saw, it was winter, and he saw I'm going to say the word, a penis made out of snow by the subway. And he thought that was hysterical and took a picture of it and posted it in our Facebook group. And I'm home, it's the weekend, and I see this, and I don't know what to do first, right? First thing I want to do is shut it all down because I don't know if some student in the class, and we had a number of very religious students, were going to be upset by this or insulted by this or, Anyway, I really freaked out. I really did. And I thought I got to shut this down again. But I didn't. I said, okay, just take a breath. I said, leave it up there, see what happens, right? Just see what happens. And then I went into class that Monday, and I asked the young man who posted it, why did you... I said, first of all, was anybody upset by it? No one raised their hand. They all thought it was funny, and they thought it was okay. Okay. I said, but what made you do that? And he goes, well, I just thought it was interesting that it was sitting there, and everybody left it alone. Like nobody broke it up, and nobody did anything, like nobody got upset by it, and it eventually just slowly melted. But, I thought it was interesting that people were okay with it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then it happened that winter, someone in Jersey had made a Venus de Milo out of snow on their lawn and got complaints and had to put a bathing suit on it, okay, or take it down. So this hit the news, right? The snow Venus de Milo with bathing suit on it. And so we brought that in, and it became this whole teachable moment. But my first, joy is spontaneous, right? And fun is spontaneous. And it wasn't coming from me, and I got nervous about it. But I allowed it, and it gave them a tremendous amount of freedom, and they brought their ideas, and they weren't shut down. So I learned a lot in that, a tremendous amount. And then we had a whole discussion about ethics and blah, and all the rest of that stuff. I thought it was joyful to allow them to sort of run the show a bit, to sort of bring in what they care about, what they find interesting. And I think that the more opportunities we do for that, the more that we're saying that education is exciting and fun and interesting, and not just a bunch of things that are in my head and I'm going to put them in your head. So
I love that. I think like so much of the work, Marsha Baxter Magolda's work and the learning partnerships model, so much of that is about situating the learning and the learner's experience and how that just helps them so much to take responsibility for their learning. And I think about, again, working in what I do, I think we tend to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that thing. I can't believe you saw and thought that was funny, delete it now. And of course, there's certainly times when that's the right move, but the learning opportunity and the discussion of the ethics of it, like that's awesome. I love that. And I don't know that a lot of folks think about that and the power that conversation had for them.
And the fact that I remember it. I mean, this was 26 years ago, and I still remember it because it was a lesson to me about letting go. It was a lesson to me about being more flexible with what the curriculum looked like.
One of our questions that we had is what's a happy accident that turned into a great lesson? I think that certainly qualifies as a teachable moment,
Yeah, that really was. It was a learning moment for them, but it was really a learning moment for me too.
And I think having the opportunities to let the students kind of lead their education and lead their learning. Yes, we may have a syllabus, we may have a departmental syllabus, we may have things that are mandated that we have to cover, but we should have some space in our practice for people to direct their own learning, their own experiences.
And it speaks negatively in a way about some of the experiences our students have K through 12, because oftentimes when you give them options, they just want to be told what to do. And that's sad. That's sad to me. Trying to encourage them to find what's interesting in what we're doing, figure out, if you keep it open enough, they should be able to find something. Sometimes I've struggled with that because students really just were like, no, what do you want me to write about? Or what do you, and I'd be like, nah,
Yeah, or even as an advisor, I have a number of students who come into my office who want me to tell them what they should do with their lives. And I don't want that responsibility. They sort of expect, because K to 12, you go to this class, then you do this, then you do that. And now you're in college and now you have choices.
Yeah.
And some of them aren't really used to that. Or maybe they don't realize they have choices yet, and so they have to kind of discover that. But yeah, that is I think a problem in our educational system as a whole.
Yeah. When I was young, I went to a school that was very progressive and they were very Dewey oriented. We had a very limited number of in-class experiences, and we had choices of projects to work on, and we would go to resource centers and work on those projects. And by the time I got to college, I knew how to be an independent learner. And it's a shame that some of those approaches aren't used anymore.
I'm thinking about a lot of times students are used to their families' expectations. How many students are going to go be a nurse because that's what mom and dad want them to do, or they heard it was a good career, and it's not necessarily the right thing for them. It's maybe they're not very good at anatomy and physiology. Maybe they're not very interested in it. Maybe they are good. They just, don't like it. So, having that space to explore.
You said earlier that sometimes they don't have a lot of support outside of the school in community college. I know that one of the things I discovered, first of all, is I used to do that exercise with them the first day. We had 1 million index cards the first day. And one of them was that one where you do your 3 things that you value, and then you have to throw one away and throw another one away, and you're left with one. I always collected the ones they threw away. And what was interesting was that 80%, roughly, put their family first and threw away education and kept family. And that was really eye-opening to me, because if there was a competition in some way between what the family needed and what they wanted to do, family won. Keeping that in mind was very important for me, at least with the students that I was working with in the community college setting. I remember having a student who, she worked 5 days a week, she went to school, she had 1 day off, and she was expected to be in church that day. And that was it, she was going to church, and so she had no time to do homework. And it wasn't, where I could say, well, just don't go to church, because that wasn't in the mix at all. What I'm saying is, really seeing where they're at and what they're dealing with. And, so maybe for her, the thing was drop a class. Maybe you're taking too much and you need to make some space in your schedule. It's not always, what we think we're going to say as an instructor, but sometimes it's what the students need. I remember a student who dropped my class And he came and he told me his mom lost his job and he had to go to work. He had 4 younger brothers and sisters. And I said, well, you dropped the right class. It was only 1 credit. It's okay. So I said, so, kudos to you. You made a good choice,
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, might think of that student from kind of a deficit mindset of, we've lost them, or did they make the right choice? But to your point, he was making decisions based off of his priorities, and that's okay. We all should have that autonomy to do that. And then I think the beauty of the learning communities, hopefully on a great campus, is that you also become a family of sorts, not to replace their current family. Usually, I feel like learning communities are providing an opportunity for students to be known, right? Like known how they really are. And it sounds like you created that environment, which is awesome.
And this was in a learning community. I was teaching a 1-credit integrative course. He stayed in the other classes. So the fact that there was a learning community, he felt comfortable enough to say, I had to drop this. And I was like, okay, no repercussions. And I remember at the time, it used to be if you dropped one, you dropped them all. But we kind of got less strict about that as you deal with people and their individual situations.
I think that does bring up the point that learning communities need to be structured and designed, but they also need to be flexible because they're not the programmed input of you are going to go into these 3 classes and you're going to take these 3 classes and you're going to go on and do whatever. They're human beings. They have different priorities. And I always tell my students, sometimes school isn't the number 1 priority,
Right.
Particularly with community college students. They've got families, they've got responsibilities, they've got jobs. I do think it's important to have some flexibility built into the learning community. Even if you've designed the greatest, most integrated thing in the world, you got to think on your feet.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think there needs to be flexibility. I think there needs to be, as we said, safety in the classroom. And the more you get to know people, the safer you feel, and that's why I think doing a lot of work at the beginning of sort of getting to know each other in whatever ways we can is really important, And my point at the conference is that if we don't know ourselves, then those parts of ourselves we're not familiar with are going to come popping out. So that's important too.
So, last question for the day. What do you feel is the most rewarding part of watching learning communities grow? You were a big part of them at Kingsborough for many, many years and watched them develop and change and lots of students. What's the most rewarding part of watching a learning community grow?
To me, it was all the relationships that I built. Among the faculty, among the administrators, among the students. There are some students I still stay in touch with. I certainly still stay in touch with faculty. I feel like it's built on relationships, and relationships are both what feeds it and what flowers from it. It's both of those things. So, I could cry when you just asked me that question because I miss a lot of it. I miss the people, I miss the work, I miss the students. I was a linguist. This was not my world. And learning communities, that became my world. It became what I cared about. I'm so grateful. And even, across the country, so many people that I met, which is why I loved going to the conference, because you got to see everyone, like these were your friends and you had jokes, and it really truly was community. It sounds corny, but it really was. And it's the relationships that to me were the most rewarding part. It really, because that didn't go away.
Well, thank you so much for your time and thank you for being here and wonderful conversation. And it's been good to catch up.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much for thinking of me and including me. See, I still feel like part of the family, even though I'm retired.
Well, of course you are part of the family. So
We're like our own learning community. When our students graduate, they're still part of that family too.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for inviting me. It's been great to see you both, and I've enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. That's all the time we have for today. A huge thank you to Janine for sharing her energy and reminding us of why we do this work. If today's episode brought a smile to your face, pass the joy along. Subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with a colleague or a student who needs a lift. Until the next time, keep infusing joy into your classrooms, keep building community, and have a fantastic week. Take care.